Interesting. Very interesting. How Caitlin Clark can say something, the old guard fans, you guys will trash her for it. And then Paige Beckers remixes the same exact message, and it's either met with praise, oh, I love it when Paige says it, or crickets, because you don't want to be caught playing the fool.
The Women's National Basketball Players Association is facing what many see as a full-scale internal implosion. Not because of billionaire ownership groups. Not because of aggressive corporate attorneys. But because of internal division that critics argue has spiraled into public self-sabotage. What we're watching feels less like a coordinated labor strategy and more like a fractured movement losing control of its own message. Because longtime power brokers within the union shifted focus from pure financial negotiation to internal rivalry. Sound fiscal arguments were overshadowed by factional disputes. Strategic leverage at the bargaining table was diluted by public infighting. And now the entire sports world is observing the fallout unfold in real time online. Welcome to the deep dive. Buckle up, because we're about to unpack what may be one of the most glaring double standards in modern professional sports. We'll break down the financial assumptions driving veteran leadership. And we'll examine why ownership groups appear increasingly confident behind closed doors. To understand how things escalated to this point, we need to rewind to December, when the union was aggressively pushing for 27% of total league gross revenue and even moving toward strike authorization as part of its negotiating strategy. They were openly floating the possibility of shutting down the season. Emotions were boiling over. In the middle of that storm, reporters pushed microphones toward Caitlin Clark, expecting her to automatically endorse the hardline labor stance. The assumption was simple: repeat the veteran leadership's messaging and stand in lockstep. But she didn't. Instead of sounding like a union foot soldier, she spoke with the tone of an executive thinking long-term. She pointed to the macroeconomic implications of the league's reported $2.2 billion media agreement and approached the situation with measured, business-minded realism. What she offered in December wasn't inflammatory rhetoric. It was a calculated warning rooted in sustainability. And that level-headed perspective is precisely what unsettled parts of the veteran establishment.
The important thing for myself, thinking about these CBA negotiations, this is the biggest moment the WNBA has ever seen. And it's not something that can be messed up. And, we're going to fight for everything that we do.
This is the most pivotal stretch the WNBA has ever faced, and mishandling it isn't an option. The games have to be played. That's where the revenue comes from. That was the core of Caitlin Clark's message. She grasped the fundamental principle of the sports business. You cannot maximize profits from a product that isn't active. Shut the season down and casual viewers drift away. Broadcast partners reconsider commitments. Sponsors rethink investments. Her warning wasn't anti-union, it was anti-collapse. She emphasized the need for middle ground, insisting the league's product must stay on the court. Across the entire 16-month standoff, it was arguably the most grounded and commercially aware comment anyone made. And the response? Instead of thoughtful engagement, backlash followed. Segments of the veteran leadership pushed back hard. Critics labeled her unsupportive. Some suggested her endorsement portfolio distorted her perspective. Commentary circles questioned her loyalty to collective interests. The narrative shifted from debating economics to scrutinizing motives. In trying to discredit the messenger, many ignored the substance of the message itself. Now fast forward. The March 10th deadline looms. Concerns about delayed salaries are no longer abstract. Anxiety is rising inside locker rooms. The union's unity appears strained. Enter Paige Beckers, an extraordinary young talent with strong ties to University of Connecticut's Powerhouse program. In the uniquely political environment of the WNBA, affiliations matter. Established voices hold influence. Media ecosystems have long memories. When Beckers addressed the same collective bargaining situation, her phrasing drew intense attention. Observers immediately compared her remarks to Clark's earlier stance, noting striking similarities in tone and reasoning, raising questions about consistency, reception, and who gets protected in moments of controversy.
us to move on our stance. And so we as players, we don't want to strike. We want to have a season. I love playing basketball. That's all I want to do. But again, there's things that need to be handled, and we want to do it as professionals. At this point,
We don't want to strike. We want a season. I love playing basketball. We want to do this as professionals. Pause right there. That is fundamentally the same core message Caitlin Clark expressed months earlier. A call for compromise, a warning that shutting things down damages the business, and a clear priority on keeping the product on the floor. Now you hear Paige Buecher's voicing a nearly identical philosophy. Avoid a work stoppage, protect the season, think long-term. So what followed? Where was the uproar? Where were the accusations about betrayal or fractured solidarity? Where were the sharp critiques from prominent WNBA commentators? This time, the volume dropped. No viral condemnation. No coordinated backlash. And that contrast didn't go unnoticed. Online communities quickly highlighted the inconsistency, questioning why similar viewpoints generated drastically different reactions. Fans began calling out what they viewed as selective outrage, arguing that the scrutiny seemed uneven depending on who delivered the message. Whether one agrees with the labor strategy or not, the conversation has now shifted from pure economics to credibility, and the internet is watching every move.
I literally said this in December. Precious P can't even come up with her own thoughts. Quote, she's racist and a scab. It's okay when she says it, but not when Caitlin does.
Back in December, when Caitlin Clark voiced that same position, critics piled on and questioned her loyalty. Fast forward, and when Paige Buecher's echoed a similar call for compromise and keeping the season intact, the backlash simply wasn't there. That contrast has fueled accusations of inconsistency and sparked intense debate online. Many fans now argue the Women's National Basketball Players Association has drifted from a unified labor message into something more fragmented and personality-driven. From the outside, ownership groups appear to be observing a divided front rather than a cohesive bargaining unit, an imbalance that can shift leverage in high-stakes negotiations. But beyond the optics and rhetoric lies the financial core of the dispute. Veteran players have pushed firm economic demands, while ownership recently responded with a substantial counteroffer, including a notable increase to the base salary cap. Under that framework, some established role players could reportedly see annual pay bumps approaching $200,000, a dramatic jump for athletes previously earning around $90,000 per season. Supporters call it meaningful progress. Skeptics argue it still falls short of revenue growth. What's clear is that this standoff is no longer just about ideology or optics. It's about how rapidly the league's expanding business model should translate into guaranteed compensation and who ultimately defines what fair looks like. For most professionals in any industry, that kind of raise would be viewed as transformational. It's the type of jump that changes long-term financial security and future planning overnight. Many would celebrate, finalize the paperwork, and lock it in. But Natasha Cloud stepped forward publicly and rejected the proposal, speaking forcefully against what some framed as a major step forward. Her stance signaled that, for certain veteran voices, the issue isn't just about the size of an individual salary bump, it's about the overall revenue structure and long-term percentage split.
Off of the table. You all know this New York market. that $200,000 jump that players are going to make, that's before taxes, that's before what they would have to pay for a potential housing market in the state of New York. So it just...
Cloud's response centered on net income, pointing out that a reported $200,000 increase is calculated before taxes and before living expenses in high-cost markets like New York. Her broader argument was that headline salary jumps don't automatically translate into long-term financial security once deductions and cost of living are factored in. Critics immediately pushed back, arguing that taxes and housing costs are universal realities across industries, not unique burdens placed on professional athletes. They contend that compensation negotiations are traditionally structured around gross salary, with players responsible for managing personal expenses and financial planning, just as stars in other leagues do. Supporters of ownership see this disconnect as symbolic of the larger impasse. Executives are modeling revenue projections, tax structures, and long-term risk, while some veteran voices are framing the debate around take-home pay and lifestyle sustainability. From that perspective, negotiations stall when both sides measure fairness differently. Meanwhile, younger figures like Caitlin Clark and Paige Buchers have publicly emphasized keeping the season intact, protecting the on-court product, and reaching workable middle ground. They've stressed that games must be played, fans must stay engaged, and broadcast partners must see continuity. Whether that pragmatism ultimately shapes the final collective bargaining agreement remains to be seen, but it highlights a generational shift in Tony Ostadedlinia approaches. There's a lot of heat in that framing, so let's slow it down and separate rhetoric from leverage, economics, and optics. First, on the moral high ground question, labor negotiations are rarely won on morality alone. They're won on unity, public support, and credible financial positioning. If fans perceive inconsistent reactions to similar comments from Caitlin Clark and Paige Buchers, that's a messaging problem. Perception matters. If one player is criticized for urging compromise while another is praised for similar pragmatism, it creates the appearance of internal bias, even if the underlying dynamics are more nuanced. In high-stakes collective bargaining, optics can erode leverage just as quickly as bad math. Second, on the financial literacy argument, compensation debates often sound extreme in public because they're anchored to different baselines. Players think in terms of revenue growth, franchise valuations, and long-term league expansion. Owners think in terms of operating margins, cash flow volatility, and risk. When a veteran like Natasha Cloud references taxes and cost of living, she's framing the discussion around take-home value and real-world sustainability. Critics frame it as misunderstanding gross versus net income. But neither side is inherently irrational. They're just arguing from different financial vantage points. That doesn't make one delusional and the other omniscient. It highlights a structural disagreement over how new media money should be distributed. Third, on generational tension, it's common in evolving leagues. Younger stars often prioritize brand growth, media stability, and uninterrupted seasons because their off-court empires depend on momentum. Veterans may focus more on locking in structural guarantees before their prime earning window closes. That's not necessarily fear of obsolescence, it's different risk tolerance shaped by career stage.as for March 10th. Deadlines concentrate power. If ownership has truly presented a final offer, the union must calculate the real probability of a work stoppage versus the economic downside of delay. If players fracture publicly, ownership's leverage increases. If players unify around a middle ground, pressure shifts back to management. Will the younger generation overthrow leadership? Historically, unions don't flip overnight, but internal pressure can reshape tone and strategy quickly when paychecks are at stake. The most likely outcome in situations like this isn't dramatic revolution. It's compromise under time pressure. The real question isn't who wins the online argument. It's who controls the narrative long enough to protect revenue, maintain fan momentum, and secure a deal that feels sustainable 5 years from now, not just satisfying in the moment.